The blood-red horizon swallowed the dying sun as a single gunshot echoed across Tascosa, Texas, silencing the evening chatter at the Rusty Spur Saloon. Preston O'Malley's weathered hand froze mid-air, whiskey glass suspended between table and lips as his eyes darted to the swinging doors. The year was 1887, and death visited this dusty corner of the Panhandle with alarming regularity. "Trouble again," muttered Sam Fletcher, the elderly bartender who'd seen Tascosa transform from a buffalo hunter's camp to a rowdy cow town over the past decade. Preston set down his glass untouched. "Reckon so." His voice carried the rough texture of a man who spoke little but thought much. At 32, he'd already lived several lifetimes cattle driver, Union scout during the last years of the war, and now foreman at the Coldwater Ranch, 10 miles outside town. The saloon emptied quickly as men rushed outside to investigate. Preston followed, more out of duty than curiosity. He'd seen enough violence to last several lifetimes. A crowd had gathered near the Wells Fargo office. Sheriff Holden was already there, his substantial frame blocking Preston's view of whatever or whoever lay in the street. "Make way," a voice called out. Doc Miller, the town's only physician, pushed through the throng. Preston hung back, hat pulled low. The less he involved himself in Tascosa's frequent troubles, the better. He was about to return to his unfinished drink when he caught a glimpse of auburn hair splayed across the dusty street. A woman. Young, from what little he could see. "She alive, Doc?" Sheriff Holden's voice carried over the murmurs. "Barely. Bullet grazed her temple. She's lost blood, but she's breathing." Something compelled Preston forward. Perhaps it was the unusual sight of a wounded woman in Tascosa, where most violence involved drunken cowboys and card cheats. Or perhaps it was simply that no one else seemed to be stepping forward to help. "Need a hand getting her to your office?" Preston asked, already kneeling beside the doctor. Doc Miller nodded gratefully. "Careful now. We don't know what other injuries she might have." The woman couldn't have been more than 25. Her face, though smudged with dirt and blood, held a delicate beauty that seemed entirely out of place in Tascosa. Her dress, once fine but now travel-worn and bloodied, suggested she wasn't local. Together, Preston and Doc Miller carried her to the physician's small office behind the general store. Sheriff Holden followed, his expression grim. "Anyone know who she is?" the sheriff asked once they'd settled the woman on Doc's examining table. No one did. "No identification on her," Doc Miller said, checking her pockets. "Just this." He held up a small locket. Inside was a daguerreotype of a stern-looking older man. "Whoever she is, someone wanted her dead," Sheriff Holden observed, examining the blood matting her hair. "Question is, did they succeed in killing whoever else they were after?" Preston frowned. "What do you mean?" The sheriff pointed to the woman's hands. "Look at her fingers. No rings, but there's a mark where one was recently removed, and these boots aren't hers too big by several sizes. Someone wanted to make identifying her difficult." Preston studied the unconscious woman with new interest. "You think she's running from something, or someone?" the sheriff replied. Doc Miller cleared his throat. "Speculation can wait. I need to tend to her wounds. You gentlemen can continue this discussion outside." As Preston turned to leave, the woman's eyelids fluttered. For just a moment so brief, he almost thought he'd imagined it. Her eyes opened. They were a startling shade of green, like spring grass after rain. "Help," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please." Then she was unconscious again. "You heard her," Doc Miller said, already gathering his instruments. "Out, both of you." Outside, the evening air had cooled. The crowd had mostly dispersed, returning to their interrupted activities. Only Sheriff Holden remained, lighting a cigarette with methodical precision. "I'll check the stagecoach records," he said, exhaling smoke. "See if any women matching her description were expected, though if she's running, she probably used a false name." Preston nodded. "Let me know if you learn anything." The sheriff studied him with narrowed eyes. "Taking an interest, O'Malley. Not like you," Preston shrugged. "Just curious." But as he walked back to his horse, he couldn't shake the image of those green eyes or the desperation in that single whispered word. Help. It had been directed at him, he was sure of it. Back at Coldwater Ranch, Preston completed his evening rounds mechanically. The vast ranch house was silent, its owners away in Fort Worth on business. As foreman, he had the place to himself except for Cookie, the ancient cook who rarely emerged from his kitchen domain. That night, Preston found sleep elusive. The wounded woman's face kept appearing in his mind. Who was she? What had brought her to Tascosa? And why had someone tried to kill her? "Whoever you are," he murmured into the darkness, "I hope you survive the night." It became his prayer, though he hadn't prayed since his mother died 15 years earlier. A simple wish spoken aloud, that the nameless woman would live to see morning. 3 days passed before Preston returned to town. The ranch demanded his attention, and he told himself the mystery woman was Doc Miller's concern, not his. Still, when he finally rode into Tascosa on ranch business, his first stop was the doctor's office. Doc Miller looked surprised to see him. "O'Malley, what brings you here? Someone hurt at Coldwater?" "No." Preston removed his hat, suddenly feeling foolish. "I was wondering about that woman, the one who was shot." The doctor's expression softened. "She's alive, though she gave me a few scares. Fever broke yesterday." Relief flooded through Preston, surprising in its intensity. "Has she said anything about who she is or what happened? That's the strange thing." Doc Miller lowered his voice. "She doesn't remember. The bullet didn't penetrate her skull, but the impact was severe. She can't recall her own name, let alone who shot her or why." Preston frowned. "Complete amnesia. She remembers some things. How to read and write. Basic facts about the world, but nothing personal, not where she's from, not her family, nothing." "Can I see her?" Doc Miller hesitated. "She's still weak, and I don't know how she'll react to strangers. But she's been asking about the man who helped me. I think she means you." Heart inexplicably racing, Preston followed the doctor to a small room at the back of the building. Doc Miller knocked gently before opening the door. "You have a visitor," he said softly. The woman was sitting up in bed, a book open on her lap. Her auburn hair had been washed and brushed, framing a face that was even more striking now that it was clean. Those green eyes immediately found Preston's. "It's you," she said, and a smile transformed her face from merely pretty to beautiful. "I remember your voice." Preston cleared his throat. "Madam, glad to see you're recovering." "I'll leave you two to talk," Doc Miller said. "But not too long, Mr. O'Malley. She needs her rest." When they were alone, an awkward silence fell. Preston wasn't accustomed to making conversation, especially with beautiful women in nightgowns. "I'm sorry," she finally said. "I don't know what to call myself. Dr. Miller says I was found without identification." "The sheriff's looking into it," Preston assured her. "Someone in town might recognize you." She touched the bandage at her temple. "And if they don't, if no one knows who I am," fear flickered in those green eyes, "then we'll figure something out." The words came automatically, surprising him. Since when had her problem become his? Preston shifted uncomfortably. "The town, I mean. Tascosa looks after its own." "Am I one of its own, though? For all we know, I could be a criminal." Her attempt at a smile faltered. "I could be anyone. You don't strike me as a criminal." "How would you know? You don't even know me." "True enough." Preston found himself smiling. There was something refreshing about her directness. "But in my experience, criminals don't usually end up shot in the street. They do the shooting." She considered this. Unless I was running from something I'd done. Were you? Running, I mean, her brow furrowed in concentration. I think so, but not from the law. I was afraid. She pressed her palms against her eyes. I can see fragments like pieces of a dream, a dark room, a man shouting. The sound of breaking glass. Preston leaned forward. That's good. Doc says memories might come back in pieces. But what if they don't? What if I never remember who I am? The vulnerability in her voice stirred something protective in him. Then you start fresh. Plenty of folks come west to begin again. She lowered her hands, eyes suddenly sharp with interest. Is that what you did, Mr. O'Malley? Start fresh? Preston stood, uncomfortable with how easily she'd turned the conversation toward him. I should let you rest. Doc was clear about not tiring you. Will you come back? The question seemed to surprise her as much as him. He should say no. Whatever trouble had found this woman would likely find her again, and Preston had spent years carefully avoiding other people's problems. Yes, he said instead. Tomorrow, if you'd like. Her smile was like sunrise breaking over the plains. I would like that very much, Mr. O'Malley. Only after he'd left did Preston realize he still didn't know what to call her. That night, as he had each night since finding her, Preston spoke her name into the darkness of his room. Whoever you are, rest well, heal strong. It wasn't quite a prayer, but it wasn't quite not one either. The next day brought unexpected complications. Preston was checking fence lines in the south pasture when one of the ranch hands, young Tommy Wilcox, rode up at a gallop. Mr. O'Malley. Sheriff sent me to find you. Says it's urgent you come to town. Preston's thoughts immediately went to the woman. Did he say why? Tommy shook his head. Just that you should hurry. Preston found Sheriff Holden outside Doc Miller's office, smoking and looking troubled. Glad you're here, O'Malley. We've got a situation. Is she all right? The sheriff nodded toward the door. She's fine, but we've got company. Fellow came in on the morning stage asking questions about a missing woman. Description matches our mystery lady. Preston felt a chill despite the warm day. Who is he? Says he's her husband. Wade Thompson, businessman from Denver. Claims she's Willow Thompson, ran off 2 weeks ago after stealing family heirlooms. And you believe him? Sheriff Holden shrugged. Papers seem in order. He's got a wedding portrait that looks like her, though the woman in it has blonde hair. She could have dyed it. That's what Thompson says. Says she's unstable, prone to rash actions. Been looking for her since she disappeared. Preston's instincts were screaming warnings. She said she was running from someone, afraid. She also has amnesia, according to Doc. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? The sheriff tapped ash from his cigarette. Look, I don't know what's what here, but legally, if she's his wife, he has rights. Can I meet this Thompson? He's inside with Doc and the woman now. Sheriff Holden studied Preston's face. You've taken quite an interest in her. Just don't want to see anyone taken advantage of. Inside, Preston found the small examining room crowded with tension. Doc Miller stood protectively near his patient, who was now dressed in a borrowed dress too large for her frame. Facing them was a well-dressed man of about 40, his expression a practiced mask of concern. Ah, the man said, turning as Preston entered. Another of my wife's rescuers, I presume, Wade Thompson. He extended a manicured hand. Preston ignored it. Madam, he said directly to the woman. Do you recognize this man? Her face was pale, her eyes wide with distress. I don't know, I don't remember. Thompson sighed dramatically. It's just as I feared. Dr. Miller says the trauma has affected her memory. My poor Willow has always been delicate. Delicate. Doc Miller repeated skeptically. The woman survived a gunshot wound that would have killed many men. Thompson's smile tightened. My wife has always been full of surprises. Now, if you gentlemen don't mind, I'd like to take Willow home where she can recover properly. "And where is home?" Preston asked. "Denver originally, but we have a house in Dallas now for my business interests." Thompson reached for the woman's hand. "Come, darling, don't you want to go home?" She flinched away from his touch. "I don't. I'm not sure." "The trauma has confused her," Thompson explained smoothly. "Willow, sweetheart, it's me, your husband." Something flashed in her eyes, recognition or fear. Preston couldn't tell which. Her hands began to tremble. "I think that's enough for today," Doc Miller intervened. "Mrs. Thompson, if that is indeed who she is still recovering. Any travel now could endanger her health." Thompson's face hardened. "I understand your concern, doctor, but I must insist. She is my wife." "You have proof beyond that photograph," Preston challenged. "Marriage license. Anyone who can vouch for you." "I didn't realize I needed to prove my relationship to my own wife to a." Thompson looked Preston up and down dismissively. "What are you exactly?" "A ranch hand. Foreman at Coldwater Ranch," Preston replied evenly. "And friend to the sheriff, who I'm sure would be interested in how eager you are to remove a witness to attempted murder from Tascosa." Thompson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I assure you, I want justice for whoever shot my wife, but her health is my primary concern." "Then you won't mind waiting a few days while she regains her strength," Doc Miller suggested, "and perhaps her memory." After a tense silence, Thompson nodded. "Very well, 3 days. I've taken a room at the hotel." He turned to the woman. "I'll visit tomorrow, Willow. Perhaps familiar company will help restore what you've lost." After he left, she collapsed back onto the bed, shaking visibly. "Are you all right, madam?" Preston asked. "I don't know." She wrapped her arms around herself. "When he called me Willow, something felt wrong. But maybe that's just because I don't remember. Or maybe because it's not your name," Preston suggested. Doc Miller sighed heavily. "Without her memory, it's her word against his, and legally, a husband's claim is strong. What if she stayed at Coldwater until she remembers?" Preston found himself saying, "The owners are away, but there's plenty of room. It would be safer than town." The doctor raised his eyebrows. "That's generous, but is it proper? Cookie's there as chaperone. And if Thompson is telling the truth, it's only for 3 days. If not..." Preston met the woman's gaze. "It gives us time to figure out what's really happening." "I'd feel safer away from town," she admitted, "if that's truly all right." And so, as dusk painted the Texas sky in bands of orange and purple, Preston O'Malley found himself escorting a nameless woman to Coldwater Ranch, acutely aware of the trust she was placing in a man she barely knew. Cookie, despite his grumbling, prepared a room in the main house and rustled up a supper better than his usual fare. Though frail-looking, the woman ate with surprising appetite. "First decent meal I've had in days," she explained, accepting a second helping of stew. "Doc Miller means well, but..." "His cooking would make a buzzard lose its appetite," Preston finished, earning a genuine laugh from her. After supper, he showed her to the ranch's small library. "Owners are educated folks. Thought you might like something to read." Her eyes lit up as she took in the shelves. "This is wonderful." She ran her fingers along the book spines. "I know I enjoy reading, though I can't remember what. Take whatever interests you." She selected a volume of poetry. "Thank you, Mr. O'Malley, for everything." "Preston," he said. "Mr. O'Malley was my father." "Preston," she repeated, testing the name. "And what should you call me?" "Woman seems impersonal, but Willow." "Doesn't feel right to you," she shook her head. "No, but I need some name, at least until I remember my real one." Preston considered. "How about Wren? Small bird, but tough. Survives where others don't." A slow smile spread across her face. "Wren, I like that." That night, Preston's evening ritual changed slightly. "Rest well, Wren," he murmured into the darkness. "Remember who you are." Come morning, he found her already awake, sitting on the porch watching the sun rise over the vast expanse of Coldwater Ranch. "You're up early," he observed, joining her with coffee. "I couldn't sleep much," Wren admitted, accepting a cup. "Too many fragments floating through my mind. Nothing clear, just feelings, fear, urgency. Any memories of Thompson?" She frowned into her coffee. "Nothing specific, but when he touched me," she shuddered. "My body reacted like it remembered something my mind doesn't. Fear, yes. But I don't know if it's because he harmed me or because I was running from someone else entirely." Wren looked up at Preston. "What if I really am his wife? What if I did steal from him and run away? Do you feel like a thief?" Her laugh held no humor. "How would I know? I don't even feel like a Willow." They spent the day around the ranch. Preston had work to do, but he found reasons to stay near the main house. Wren seemed content to explore the grounds, read on the porch, and even help Cookie with dinner preparations, much to the old cook's gruff delight. "Girl knows her way around a kitchen," he told Preston privately. "Makes a fine apple pie. Wherever she comes from, she wasn't raised idle." The observation stayed with Preston. If she were truly the pampered wife of a wealthy businessman, would she know how to cook? Would her hands show the slight calluses he'd noticed? That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the day's last light fade, Wren suddenly gasped. "What is it?" Preston was immediately alert. "I remembered something." She pressed her fingers to her temples. "A name. Not mine, but Catherine. Catherine Keller." "Who is she?" "I don't know, but it feels important." Frustration crossed her face. "Why can I remember that name but not my own?" "Brain injuries are strange," Preston said, repeating what Doc Miller had told him. "Memories can come back in any order." Wren nodded, but her expression remained troubled. "Preston, what happens if Thompson really is my husband? What if he takes me away before I remember the truth?" The possibility had been haunting Preston all day. "We'll figure something out." "We," she repeated softly. "You keep saying that. Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." It was a fair question, one Preston had been asking himself. Maybe because no one else is, or maybe because... He hesitated, unaccustomed to sharing his thoughts. "When I found you in the street, you looked at me and said help, just that one word. And something in me responded." In the fading light, her eyes seemed to shimmer. "I'm glad it was you who found me." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then Cookie called them in for supper, breaking the spell. That night, Preston's prayer was more urgent. "Remember, Wren, remember before it's too late." The next morning brought Sheriff Holden to Coldwater, his expression grave. "Thompson's making noise in town, says you've kidnapped his wife. He's talking about getting a court order." Preston's jaw tightened. "She came willingly. I know that. But legally, her consent doesn't matter much if she's his wife." The sheriff removed his hat, running a hand through thinning hair. "Look, O'Malley, I'm trying to buy you time, but unless she remembers something concrete or we find evidence against Thompson." "I understand." Preston knew the sheriff was right. In the eyes of the law, a husband's rights to his wife were nearly absolute. "Thanks for the warning." After the sheriff left, Preston found Wren in the garden behind the house. She looked up as he approached, immediately sensing his mood. Bad news. "Thompson's getting impatient." Fear flickered across her face. "Tomorrow is the third day." "Yes." She touched the healing wound at her temple. "I need to remember. There was something about that name, Catherine Keller, something important." Preston sat beside her on the garden bench. "Try working backward. You remember the name. Is there a face that goes with it? A place?" Wren closed her eyes, concentrating. "A house. Big, white, and a little girl with blonde curls." Her brow furrowed. "She's running toward me, calling me Mama." Her eyes flew open, wide with shock. "I have a daughter." The revelation hung in the air between them. "Are you certain?" Preston asked gently. Yes, her name is Catherine, Katie. Tears filled Wren's eyes. She's 6 years old. I left her somewhere safe. Not with Thompson. No. The vehemence in her voice was startling. Never with him. He's not. She struggled, pressing her hands against her temples. He's not her father, and he's not my husband. Relief flooded through Preston, followed immediately by concern. If he's not your husband, why is he claiming you are? I don't know, but I'm certain. Her eyes met his, clear and determined despite her tears. I need to remember the rest, Preston. My daughter needs me. That afternoon they rode into town together to consult Doc Miller. The physician examined Wren's wound and listened to her account of the recovered memories. The amnesia is lifting, as I hoped it would, he confirmed. But it's coming back in fragments, which is normal. The emotional memories, your connection to your daughter, returned first because they're the strongest. How do I speed up the process? Wren asked. I need to remember everything before tomorrow. Familiar surroundings can help, Doc Miller suggested, or objects from your past. The locket, Preston remembered. You had a locket when we found you. Doc Miller retrieved it from his desk drawer. Sheriff returned it after examining it. No identifying marks, I'm afraid. Wren opened the small silver oval. Inside was the image of a stern-looking man with a full beard. She stared at it intently, then gasped. Father, she whispered. This is my father. You recognize him? Preston asked. Yes, Judge William Kincaid. More memories seemed to flood back as she spoke. I'm Willa Kincaid Keller. I'm a widow. She looked up, her eyes bright with recognition. My husband was David Keller. He died last year of typhoid. And Thompson, Doc Miller prompted. Wren, no, Willa shuddered. Alfred Wade. He changed the order of his names. He worked for my father's law practice in St. Louis. After David died, Alfred began calling regularly. He wanted to marry me, was persistent despite my refusals. Her voice hardened. When my father died 3 months ago, Alfred's behavior became frightening. He claimed my father had promised I would marry him. That as executor of the estate, he controlled my inheritance. Did he? Preston asked. No. My father left everything to me in trust for Catherine. Alfred falsified documents, tried to force me to sign over control. Willa's hands clenched around the locket. When I threatened to expose him, Her voice faltered. He locked me in my room, said he would take Catherine away if I didn't cooperate. So you escaped, Preston guessed. Willa nodded. I took Catherine to my cousin in Austin. Then I fled north, hoping to throw Alfred off our trail while I gathered evidence of his forgeries. I had proof in my bag. She looked up, alarmed. My bag? Was there a carpet bag with me? Doc Miller shook his head. Just the clothes you were wearing. Alfred must have taken it after shooting me, Willa said grimly. The documents inside would have proven his crimes. You remember the shooting? Preston asked. Pieces of it. I just arrived in Tascosa. Was asking directions to the sheriff's office when I saw Alfred. I ran, but she touched her temple. That's where the memories stop. Doc Miller cleared his throat. This is all very disturbing, but without those documents, it's still your word against his. Not entirely, Preston said thoughtfully. We can wire Austin, confirm your cousin has your daughter, and St. Louis there must be people there who know you're Willa Keller, not Willow Thompson. That will take time, Doc Miller warned. Thompson or Wade isn't going to wait. Then we need to keep him waiting, Preston decided. Sheriff Holden needs to hear this story. If Wade shot you, he's wanted for attempted murder, regardless of who he claims you are. The sheriff listened to Willa's recovered memories with growing concern. It's serious if true, Mrs. Keller, but proving it. Wire Austin, Preston suggested. Ask about Catherine Keller being in the care of Mrs. Keller's cousin. I can do that, Sheriff Holden agreed. but it'll take time for a reply, and meanwhile, Thompson or Wade is expecting to leave with his wife tomorrow." "Then arrest him," Preston said bluntly. "On what charge? We have no witnesses to the shooting." Willa straightened. "Attempted kidnapping, then." "He's trying to take me against my will." "Not if you're his wife, which legally we can't disprove yet." The sheriff sighed heavily. "Best I can do is delay. I'll tell him I need to verify his identification before releasing Mrs. Keller into his custody. That might buy us a day or two." "Not enough," Preston argued. "It's all I can legally do," Sheriff Holden said firmly. "Unless you're suggesting I break the law," the question hung in the air. "No," Preston finally said, "but I might have another idea." Back at Coldwater that evening, Preston outlined his plan to Willa. "It's risky," he admitted. "If we're wrong about Wade, I could end up in jail." "We're not wrong," Willa said with quiet certainty. "I remember more every hour. Alfred Wade is a dangerous man who's already tried to kill me once. He won't hesitate to try again if he gets me alone." Preston studied her face in the lamplight. In just days, she transformed from the frightened, confused woman in Doc Miller's office to this determined, clear-eyed person before him. The change should have made her seem more like a stranger, but paradoxically, he felt he knew her better now. "Why did you help me, Preston?" she asked suddenly. "From the very beginning, when you didn't even know my name." He considered deflecting the question again, but found he wanted to give her an honest answer. "When I was 16, my mother was murdered by a man who claimed to love her. No one intervened, though many suspected what was happening. I swore I'd never stand by if I saw someone in similar danger." Willa reached across the table and took his hand. Her touch was warm, steady. "Thank you for not standing by." That night, Preston's prayer changed again. "Stay strong, Willa. Tomorrow we fight." Morning brought Alfred Wade to Coldwater Ranch, accompanied by Sheriff Holden. Wade's smooth facade had cracked, revealing the impatience beneath. "This is outrageous," he declared, storming into the ranch house. "I've been more than patient. I'm taking my wife home today, with or without your approval." Preston stood his ground. "That might be difficult, considering she isn't your wife." Wade's eyes narrowed. "What nonsense is this?" "Her memory has returned," Sheriff Holden explained. "She claims to be Willa Keller, widow of David Keller from St. Louis." "Preposterous," Wade scoffed. "The injury has confused her further. I have documentation proving she's Willow Thompson." "Forged documentation," Willa said, entering the room. She dressed carefully in her borrowed clothes, her auburn hair neatly arranged, her posture straight and dignified. "Just as you forged documents to try to steal my inheritance." Wade's face hardened. "This is absurd. Sheriff, I insist you enforce my rights as her husband." "I've sent telegrams to Austin and St. Louis," Sheriff Holden replied. "Until I receive confirmation of Mrs. Keller's identity, I can't compel her to go anywhere." "This is an outrage. I demand—" "You demand nothing," Preston interrupted. "The only demand here is mine, that you confess to shooting Mrs. Keller and attempting to kidnap her for her fortune." Wade laughed, though his eyes darted nervously between them. "You have no proof of these wild accusations." "Oh, but we do," Preston bluffed. "Mrs. Keller's bag wasn't lost after all. A ranch hand found it hidden near where she was shot." Wade's composure slipped momentarily. "Impossible." "I took," he caught himself, but too late. Sheriff Holden stepped forward. "You took what, Mr. Wade?" Wade's hand moved suddenly toward his jacket. Preston reacted instantly, tackling him to the floor as a pistol discharged, the bullet splintering the ceiling beam overhead. The sheriff helped Preston subdue Wade, quickly disarming and handcuffing him. "Alfred Wade, you're under arrest for attempted murder and fraud." "You have anything to say for yourself?" Wade glared at Willa. "You should have died in that street. You and your brat will never see a penny of Kincaid's money. Take him away, Sheriff, Preston said quietly, before I forget I'm a civilized man. After Wade and Sheriff Holden departed, Preston and Willa stood in stunned silence. The gamble had paid off, but barely. Are you all right? Preston finally asked. Willa nodded, though she was visibly shaken. I keep remembering more, the terror of being locked in my room. The desperate escape with Catherine, the constant fear he would find us. She looked up at Preston. But it's over now, isn't it? Yes, Preston assured her. Wade will stand trial. With his confession and the telegrams confirming your identity, he'll likely hang. And Catherine is safe with my cousin. Willa's shoulders relaxed slightly. I need to go to her, of course. Preston tried to ignore the pang her words caused. He'd known all along she wouldn't stay in Tascosa. She had a life elsewhere, a child waiting for her. I'll arrange passage for you to Austin as soon as you're ready. Preston. She stepped closer. I don't know how to thank you. No need. Anyone would have done the same. No, not anyone. Her green eyes held his. You helped a nameless woman when others would have walked away. You spoke my name when I couldn't remember it myself. You believed in me when you had no reason to. Wren, he said softly. I called you Wren. Yes. Her smile was gentle. A small bird, but tough. I think I'll keep it Willa Wren Kincaid Keller. Rather a lot of names, but I've earned them all. Preston found himself smiling back. It suits you. I have to go to Catherine, she said again, but made no move to step away. But after that, after I've settled things in St. Louis, I've been thinking about what comes next. Hope flickered in Preston's chest, dangerous and unbidden. And what's that? Texas agrees with me, Willa said carefully. The open spaces, the freedom, a place where a woman might start fresh, raise her daughter away from painful memories. Austin is a fine city, Preston managed to say. It is, but I was thinking somewhere smaller. A place where people look out for each other, even strangers. Tascosa has its charms, Preston admitted, though it's rough around the edges. So am I, it seems. Willa's gaze was steady, intent. Would there be a place here for a widow with a young daughter, perhaps even at Coldwater Ranch? I understand they value good management. Preston's heart raced. The owners do mention wanting a proper housekeeper for the main house, someone who can manage accounts, oversee the domestic side of things. That sounds like a position I'd be qualified for, Willa said, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Especially if the foreman didn't mind having a family nearby. I don't think he'd mind at all, Preston said quietly. In fact, he might welcome it. The space between them seemed charged with possibility. Preston had lived a solitary life for so long, guarding himself against attachments. Yet in just days, this woman had bypassed every defense. Go to your daughter, he said. Settle your affairs. And if you still feel the same way, Coldwater will be waiting. And its foreman, Willa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Every day, Preston promised. I'll speak your name morning and night so you remember the way back. 2 months passed. Long, quiet months during which Preston threw himself into ranch work with singular focus. The telegrams from St. Louis confirmed everything: Willa's identity, Wade's crimes, the inheritance that was rightfully hers. Sheriff Holden wrote that Wade had been extradited to Missouri to face additional charges of fraud and forgery. Preston received one letter from Willa, sent from St. Louis. She wrote of Catherine's joy at their reunion, of the legal proceedings against Wade, of her plans to sell her father's house and settle his estate. She closed with a simple line that Preston read over and over. Catherine asks about the man who saved her mama. I've told her we'll see him soon. But weeks passed with no further word. Preston told himself it was natural she had a life to reconstruct, a daughter to care for, an estate to settle. She'd likely reconsidered the impulsive suggestion of returning to Tascosa. Why would she? What could a dusty Texas cow town offer a woman of means and education? Still, each night he spoke her name into the darkness. Willa Wren Kincaid Keller, remember your way back. A ritual that became both prayer and penance for wanting what he shouldn't. Autumn came to the Panhandle, bringing cooler temperatures and the first cattle shipments to the railhead. Preston was in town overseeing the loading when he heard his name called. "Mr. O'Malley, telegram for you." The message was brief. Arriving Tascosa, October 15th afternoon stage. Will require transportation. Bring wagon, WK, October 15th. Today, Preston abandoned the cattle drive without a second thought, racing to the livery for the ranch wagon. He reached the stage depot just as the afternoon coach was pulling in, dust swirling around the wheels. The driver tossed down bags as passengers began to disembark: a traveling salesman, an elderly couple, a young man in an Eastern suit. And then, finally, a woman in a neat blue traveling dress, her auburn hair tucked beneath a modest hat. Willa. She scanned the waiting crowd, her face lighting when she saw Preston. He moved toward her automatically, removing his hat. "Mrs. Keller, Mr. O'Malley." Her smile was everything he'd remembered. "I see you got my telegram." "Just barely in time," he admitted. "Mama, is that him?" A small voice interrupted as a little girl peeked around Willa's skirts. She had her mother's green eyes but blonde curls that must have come from her father. "Yes, Katie, this is Mr. O'Malley, the man who helped me when I was hurt." Willa gently urged her daughter forward. "Catherine, say hello." The child studied Preston with solemn eyes. "Thank you for saving my mama," she said with careful formality. Preston knelt to her level. "You're very welcome, Miss Catherine. Your mother is a brave lady." Catherine nodded seriously. "The bravest, like a wren." Preston glanced up at Willa, who shrugged with a small smile. "I may have told her the story." "You have luggage?" Preston asked, standing. "Rather a lot, I'm afraid." Willa gestured to several trunks being unloaded. "I hope your wagon can accommodate us." "It's seen heavier loads," Preston assured her, though his eyes never left her face. Are you staying then?" "If the position is still available," Willa said, a question in her eyes. "It is." Preston found himself grinning foolishly. The owners were quite enthusiastic about having a proper housekeeper, especially one with business experience. "And the foreman?" Willa asked softly. "What does he think?" "The foreman thinks." Preston hesitated, aware of the public setting and the child watching them curiously. "The foreman thinks his prayers have been answered." Willa's eyes widened slightly. "Prayers? A manner of speaking," Preston said, suddenly self-conscious. "I'm not much for formal religion." "And yet you spoke my name every night," Willa said. "Like a prayer." Preston stared at her. "How did you know that?" "I didn't, not for certain, but I felt it somehow, as if your voice was calling me back." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I spoke yours too, Preston, every night to remember what I was coming back to." The admission struck him speechless. All those nights, all those whispered names in the darkness, had they somehow reached across the distance between them? "Mama, I'm hungry," Catherine announced, breaking the moment. Preston collected himself. "We should get you both to Coldwater. Cookie will have supper waiting." The ride to the ranch passed in a blur of conversation. Willa had indeed sold her father's house and settled his affairs. The inheritance was substantial, now securely held in trust for Catherine, with Willa as administrator. "I've invested some in several businesses," she explained, "including a small stake in a cattle operation near Austin." "You're becoming a proper Texan," Preston observed with a smile. "I'm trying," Willa admitted, "though I still have much to learn." Catherine had fallen asleep against her mother, exhausted from travel. In the quiet, Preston finally asked the question that had been burning inside him. "Why did you come back, Willa? You could have gone anywhere, done anything." She was silent for a long moment, watching the Panhandle landscape roll by. "After David died, I thought my life was over. Then when Father passed and Alfred began his campaign to control me, I felt trapped, desperate." She turned to face Preston. "But here in Tascosa, even when I couldn't remember my own name, I felt free for the first time in years. Because Wade was gone, partly, but mostly because of you." Her voice softened. "You saw me not as someone's daughter or wife or mother, but as myself. You gave me a name when I had none, and somehow it felt more true than any I'd carried before." "Wren," Preston said quietly. "Yes, Wren," she smiled. "Small but resilient. That's who I want Catherine to see when she looks at her mother. Not a victim, not someone defined by tragedy, but a woman strong enough to build something new. And you want to build it here." Preston could hardly believe it. "If you'll have us." The simple phrase contained worlds of meaning. Preston forced himself to speak carefully. "Coldwater Ranch would be honored to have you as its housekeeper, Mrs. Keller. The position comes with the east wing of the main house. Plenty of room for you and Catherine." "And the foreman?" Willa asked again. "Where does he fit in this arrangement?" Preston slowed the wagon, turning to face her fully. "The foreman lives in a cabin near the main house. It's small but sound. He's been considering building something larger, something that might suit a family one day, if that were of interest." "It might be," Willa said softly. "In time." "Time is something I have plenty of," Preston assured her. "I've waited this long to find someone worth building for." Her smile was like sunrise breaking over the plains. "Then we understand each other, Mr. O'Malley." "I believe we do, Mrs. Keller." That night, for the first time in months, Preston didn't whisper Willa's name into the darkness. Instead, he stepped onto his porch and looked toward the main house, where a lamp glowed in the east wing. She was there, real and solid, no longer a prayer but a presence. "Welcome home, Wren," he said aloud. "Welcome home." Spring came early to the Panhandle the following year. The bluebonnets carpeted the lower pastures of Coldwater Ranch, and the air carried the promise of new beginnings. Preston stood on the porch of his newly completed house, larger than his old cabin but still modest, 2 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, a small sitting room with bookshelves built into the walls. Through the open door, he could hear Willa directing the placement of furniture, her voice blending with Catherine's excited chatter. 10 months had passed since their return to Tascosa. 10 months of careful courtship, of getting to know each other properly, of building trust. Catherine had taken to ranch life with a child's easy adaptability, following Cookie around the kitchen and trailing after Preston on his rounds whenever her mother allowed. Willa had transformed the main house, bringing order and comfort to the long-neglected rooms. The owners, impressed with her management, had given her increasing responsibility for the ranch's accounts and correspondence. She'd grown confident, capable, still the resilient Wren he'd named her, but now thriving rather than merely surviving. Their wedding the previous week had been small but joyful. Sheriff Holden had given the bride away, Doc Miller had been best man, and Catherine had scattered wildflowers along the church aisle with solemn dedication to her important task. Preston. Willa appeared in the doorway, a tendril of auburn hair escaping her practical bun. "Where should we put your father's desk?" "By the window," he suggested. "Best light there." She nodded, disappearing back inside. Preston remained on the porch, savoring the moment. How strange life's paths were. Had he not been in Tascosa that evening, had he not looked toward the commotion outside the Wells Fargo office, had he not seen that glimpse of auburn hair in the dust? "Penny for your thoughts," Willa said, returning to join him. "Just reflecting on luck," Preston replied, putting his arm around her shoulders. Or fate, maybe, or prayers, she suggested, leaning into him. Preston smiled. You know, I spoke your name every night while you were gone, even before I knew what it was. I know, Willa said softly. You told me once that when you found me, I looked at you and said help. But that's not all I said, is it? Preston looked at her in surprise. How did you know? I remembered eventually. I saw you kneeling beside me, and I thought you were the answer to my desperate prayers. So I said help and then your name. My name? How could you have known it? I didn't, Willa admitted. Not consciously. But later, when Doc Miller mentioned Preston O'Malley had helped bring me to his office, it felt right. Familiar. So all those nights I spoke your name. You were answering my first prayer to you, Willa finished. And I was answering yours. From inside the house came the sound of Catherine singing to herself as she arranged her small collection of books on the new shelves. Our family, Preston said wonderingly. I never thought I'd have one. Nor I, after David died. Willa's hand found his. But here we are. Here they were indeed, a former lone cowboy, a widow who had fled for her life, and a child who had waited patiently for her mother's return. An unlikely family forged from desperation and chance, strengthened by choice and love. That night in their new house, Preston and Willa lay together in the quiet darkness. No more whispered names, no more prayers sent across distance and uncertainty. Instead, Preston spoke his wife's name against her skin, a different kind of prayer altogether, one of gratitude and promise. And in the morning, as dawn painted the eastern sky, Preston O'Malley stepped onto his porch and spoke her name again, not in desperate hope, but in contented certainty. Willa Wren O'Malley, he said to the new day. My wife, my home. Inside, he heard her stirring, heard Catherine's light footsteps, the beginning of their day together. No longer was he speaking a forgotten name like a prayer. Now he was simply calling his family to breakfast, the most ordinary miracle of all. Nobody had remembered her name once, but a cowboy had spoken it like a prayer every morning and night without failing. And somehow, against all odds, she had found her way home to him.